listening to Unraveled, the Adverb podcast.
List of regions of lost darkness. List of known supermassive black holes. List of subduction zones. List of former futures exchanges.
For the final episode of our Venice special, we'd like to take you to the pavilion of New Zealand. It is housed in the Palazzina Canonica, right by the bank of the Canale Grande. However, the work by the artist Dane Mitchell is not immediately visible. The corridors and staircases of the néo-Renaissance palace, built in 1911, are empty, save for the occasional piece of furniture. At the heart of the building, there's the library, whose walls are lined with dark wooden bookshelves. They too are empty. Only in the middle of the well-lit room is a rack with a printer on top, which spews out endless paper, slowly filling the space. This is only one part of the work post hoc by Dane Mitchell, who represents New Zealand this year. The artist in his early 40s describes his artwork as one big language object, which is linked to the Palazzina and 3 other spots in the city. Mitchell has been active as an artist since 1999, and in the past decade he has had more than 30 solo shows. His work is concerned with disappearance and the rift between objects and memory, and it is aptly characterized as intangible. When we attended the opening party of the pavilion and heard the artist speak about his work, we knew we had to interview him for Unraveled. So we sat down the following day and let him take us through the preparation process and the setup of his work, which is not just an enumeration of things lost, but it also speaks about the fleetingness of the world around us.
Yeah, the pavilion, so it's the New Zealand National Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and it's an exhibition, a solo exhibition by me. It's new work. It's titled Post Hoc, and the central element of the exhibition is a very, very large invisible form. It is a language object. In fact, it is a list. It is a giant list that I've made with a couple of researchers helping me a little bit, but it is predominantly produced by me. And it is a list of names of things that have disappeared, that have vanished, that have become obsolete, that are withdrawn, that are forces of absence. And so this language object is 3 million words long. And it was my intention for it to be thought about as an object in the sense that I really wanted to think about it as a language object, and that when the exhibition starts, the reading of these names begins. And then when the exhibition stops, the reading ends. And so that it is this kind of colossal object whereby from 10 o'clock every morning until 6 at night when the exhibition closes, 8 hours a day, that list of names is read and it does not repeat.
So that's been how many names did you put together, did you compile?
Well, it's 3 million words. In terms of the number of names, I don't actually have that information ready to hand, but the utterance that occurs, the reading that occurs, that speech act, it's somewhere between 18,000 and 22,000 words a day that are read. So some of those, so in terms of how many names, it's quite difficult to say because, for example, the list of dinosaurs has a certain number, but other things like the list of abandoned oil platforms are defined by way of their longitudinal, latitudinal position and by their, the company that owns them. So the naming is slightly different each time. But what I was really interested in doing was not just thinking about this language object as a form, but to think about the act of speaking and to think about this speech act as a producer of realities. That by saying something we make it so. And so by uttering these names, my hope was that much like when we name the dead, when we call out the names of people lost in the war, for example, that we might name these gone and vanished and disappeared and obsolete and withdrawn objects, entities, non-human species, these technologies. We might name them and call them back up momentarily, sort of conjure them back.
And now, is it possibly like to hear them, like
Yeah,
into
so
the exhibition space?
so what I've described is basically the central element, but it is expressed, or let's say experienced, across several different physical kind of outcomes. The heart or the brain of the project is an object that sits in this very raw space, and it's a galvanized steel wedge. It looks a bit like a giant kind of doorstop or something, but it's called a tapered anechoic chamber. It's an anechoic chamber. It's in that it's echo-free. It's used by engineers to test fields of transmission. So inside this object, the voice is read, but we can't access it. We can't hear it. We can stare into the box, which is a bit like staring into this kind of blue cave. It's in the internal spaces covered in these acoustic wedges. And inside that space, there is a speaker and a microphone. And this for me was just a very simple way to imagine something speaking and something listening. Something very beautiful happens inside that box, and this is not a metaphor. This is an actual thing that box does by way of its functionality, is that whatever is transmitted inside that box vanishes over an infinite horizon and never comes back or bounces off anything. A transmission moves away from the source and never hits anything. So in a sense, that box has an infinite space of transmission. I'm really interested in transmissions, and that extends across the exhibition. The other element, there are three physical elements. There's that chamber where the voice is uttered. There are these very peculiar trees that populate the garden of the pavilion. There are 3 at the pavilion, and there are a further 4 across Venice. There's one at the hospital, one at the School of Architecture, the University of Architecture, one at St. Helena Park. Amazingly, it's called the Park of Remembrance, and also at the Bacini Vaporetto stop in North Arsenale. They are not real trees. They come from China, from Guangzhou, which is a kind of factory of the world. We're probably sitting on seats right now that were made in Guangzhou, and if we're not, there's certainly an object nearby that was. And the factory that makes these fake technological poor copies of nature, they make these trees for the telecommunications industry. About 25 years ago, companies, cell phone companies, were starting to look for ways to camouflage and hide their infrastructure. Because in order for us to all experience and use this, phone network to which we're all so tethered and reliant, and that permeates everything, it's dependent on a very kind of visible infrastructure. We experience the kind of invisible network that connects us all, but it's held up by all this very physical stuff. And so one thing that needs to occur for a network of that nature to function is that it needs to be held up high on our landscape. And so these companies started to devise ways to hide this technology. And one of these ways was to produce fake trees. And so I worked with a factory that produced these to make these 7 stealth cell towers, as they're called, or as they're sometimes rather affectionately known as Frankenpines. So these Frankenpines are literal transmitters in my project. So from that chamber, the lists are generated, they are sent over that infinite horizon inside the box, and then they are also broadcast or transmitted, sent out to each tree, which contains the list in their entirety. And they transmit in a way off of themselves. They emit a signal, and you can join the network by way of your phone. You just select the network like you would a Wi-Fi hotspot. And when you do that, you come offline and you're in a one-to-one relationship with this techno tree. You are connected to the technological tree, and you can listen to any one of these lists.
List of abandoned hamlets and parishes. List of haunted locations. List of dam failures. List of chimeras.
And how did you choose those spaces to put those trees? Are they site-specific in relation to this list?
Yeah, they certainly are. I mean, Venice is a complicated place to do such things. But I was really sure about a couple of those locations and fought very hard to make sure they happened. And they do connect in very meaningful ways for me. The hospital in particular, that is a site of mortality. It's a place of birth and of death. It's also a place of the microbial and the viral and the invisible. So I really loved this idea of having a tree at the hospital. It's also a kind of a working part of a city, and these trees are mistaken for infrastructure in those locations. They don't necessarily read as art objects. So thinking about parts of the city that are quite lived in was really interesting to me. So the hospital was really important. It's in a kind of an enclosed garden in the hospital that is open to the public, and it's kind of right next to the psychiatric ward, and there are like these cats roaming around the garden. It's an amazing place. Yeah, that was an important one. The University of Architecture was also one that I really wanted to secure, and I'm very happy that we could, because I think it's really interesting to think about a university as a place for learning, as a place for the accruement of knowledge, and also for speculative thinking, and also to think about our built environment. It's a school of architecture, and these trees are a kind of hybridized object that is something that tries to blend into a natural environment, but is actually part of our built environment. So it has a kind of complicated relationship with buildings or with built spaces.
That was as well like one of my questions. I was wondering why you were highlighting this fakeness of those trees. Are you interested to a kind of artificial nature?
Yeah, I think they are really problematic objects. They are antagonistic objects. They are aesthetically antagonistic, and they are environmentally antagonistic. I think it was really important to me in this project that all of the materials, all of the forms are pre-existing things, that they are things that we as a species produce. And it is deeply troubling, deeply beautiful, deeply weird that we do this. We make these fake trees that stand in for nature, that are at the expense of nature. So we replace nature with a surrogate that is damaging to it. So yeah, I think also these trees, I'm not saying the work does all of this, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have around the work. And they are pine, and that was a very deliberate decision. I think most of our experiences of nature are technological. When we see nature, it is, generally speaking, it is framed by us. We go to national parks to see nature in some kind of imagined natural state. But in fact, that is a technological space. That is a managed environment. In New Zealand in particular, we are very proud of our native and natural environment. And yet, I think we also need to be honest that our parklands are technological spaces. They are mapped, there are traps, we eradicate invasive species, we prioritize a certain moment in time where nature was untouched by a kind of colonial history. So all of these things make our relationship very kind of really complex. And the pine tree is a tree that we in New Zealand have a very peculiar relationship to. We grow pine faster, 7 times faster than anywhere else, and we grow a lot of pine trees because it's capital. It's treated as an industrial form. So already pine trees are not nature. And very interestingly, pine in New Zealand, although encouraged to grow in vast numbers for capital and wealth accruement, pine is an invasive species. If a pine leaves the area in which it grows, it is called a wilding. And it is an invasive species and it must be killed. So, for example, when I go to a piece of land that my family have owned for a very long time, it's a beautiful piece of native forest, we would call it bush. So I'm constantly with a chainsaw killing pine trees. So it's a very peculiar relationship with a piece of nature. I see the pine tree already as a kind of technology, and so my techno trees are a kind of, it's really dialed up. They're a really kind of fake.
are in this moment as well where we speak about the sixth extinction.
Yeah.
And in the sixth extinction, we plan kind of 1 million species, call it the disappearance of 1 million species. How far this relation as well with the environment was important in your work?
Let's say it wasn't central to my thinking when I devised the project and when I was making the project, but I was very, very interested in the project touching on or impinging on all kinds of topical conversations. I think it's really interesting when an artwork can be somewhat agile enough to kind of dance around an issue, or for example, kind of squint at issues, kind of look sideways at things. And I was certainly thinking about these really important notions in relationship to the vast loss of species. I mean, of course, there are a lot of very self-evident lists on the list of lists, as I call it, that point to extinction and goneness in relationship to non-human species. And being from New Zealand, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, I was very aware of our over-representation in many of those lists. So the list of extinct birds, I mean, we are overrepresented in that list because islands, they are very fragile ecologies. I mean, I think the title of the exhibition points to that a little bit. The title of the exhibition is Post Hoc, which translates to after this. It's Latin, and Latin actually is on the list of extinct languages. It's also a language that's used for naming. This Western epistemological kind of framework of encyclopedic kind of thinking is such that we look to categorize the world, to build a kind of encyclopedic knowledge of the world, and we believe in a way there's a sort of sense of that we can somehow contain the world through knowledge. So it's a language of naming of flora and fauna. And so I was thinking about the fact that we live in a moment of afterness. We live after all of these lists of these things, but we also live in a moment of being after climate change or after mass extinction. So there was a kind of correlative connection. There's a connection I wanted to make. The title also comes from a longer phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates to after this, therefore because this. And it's a phrase that tells us that we should be cautious, that we should be careful to assume causal links between events. So just because something happens, we should not assume that an event that happened before it is somehow connected to it. And for me, this was a way to sort of try to untether the work from being a moral lesson, because the work is not a moral lesson. I really am not trying to say that we are responsible for all of this loss, because there are things on that list that we should be glad are gone. There are cured diseases.
So how do you come to those lists?
I mean, I worked for a year and a half, really, really intensely on that list. It's very homemade. I mean, it's very handmade. It's not an algorithm that goes out and kind of mines for data. It's very much authored by me. I started with, maybe 25, I'm kind of guessing here, but maybe I started with like 25 ideas for the lists. Because I've always been interested I have in my work been exploring unseen forces and things that sit on the edge of visibility, and thinking about the unseen as a kind of seething presence in our world and our experiences and in our knowledge systems. And so I was thinking about all of this invisible and gone stuff that's right in front of us. And so my list began with things like extinct languages, former nations. That's why I needed to do most of them myself. I gathered about 70% of the data on the lists myself. And it was a case that I needed to do that because I was really just, new categories were kind of being developed as I was researching. Things would come up. And that was an incredibly exciting part of the project for me. And then others, I had some help from third parties. So an environmental group named End Coal were really helpful. I was searching really for a long time for a list of abandoned oil platforms. All of these rusting oil platforms that sit out in our ocean. There are over 40,000 of them. Art Loss Register is a company in the UK, and they were very generous in giving me a huge database of missing artworks, which reads for 7 hours 40 a day for 8 days. So it's an incredibly long list. I found an enthusiast of lighthouses who gave me a list of abandoned lighthouses. There were some paleontological organizations that were very helpful.
Items out loud.
Yeah, her name is Amy. She is not a person, but she has a name. Much like the trees, which are surrogates for nature, Amy is a surrogate for us. She is an AI voice. She has a text-to-speech technology. Again, like the trees and the chamber, she is a ready-to-hand material. She is an existing product. She has a kind of very authoritative but gentle English accent. And she's very good at pronouncing Latin, which is a language that appears on these lists of certainly of extinct species. So yeah, she must be very exhausted, a tired digital force,
but never exhausted as well.
But inexhaustible. Yeah, exactly.
But like, how far this project is specific to New Zealand? Would you say?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, I am from Aotearoa, New Zealand. That is my home. New Zealand is reflected in those lists in all kinds of ways. I mean, it's a subjective list, as I said, so I'm in those lists in all kinds of ways too. My concerns, my interests, my thinking, I'm all over that. The work embraces the impossibility of the task, so it is very much a kind of poetic force. There is the full New Zealand paleontological record read. And fossils was something I was really interested in thinking about for this list, in the way that they are kind of absences. The fossil is a sort of a thing that's not the thing. I don't know, it's a complicated kind of absence. And so the full New Zealand paleontological record is read. There's also a list of objects of lost provenance, and those are mainly taonga Māori and from the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa. And so Te Papa, who are a partner organisation, partner museum for the presentation of this project, were very generous in giving me the names of over 8,000 objects. Where there's a missing link for an object, that object is named and listed. So New Zealand has a strong presence in the list.
But how do you feel about this question of nationality that Venice, in particular, as Biennale, give this importance to nations?
Yeah, there's something very comical and beautiful about it too. I kind of like it. I mean, what I do like hearing people say is, I'm going to France, or I'm off to Portugal, or people talk specifically about a nation when they go to see an exhibition. It's pretty funny. I mean, the trees, when I was thinking about this project and my cell tower pines that I've inserted across the city, I was really also, I mentioned that I was thinking about the list, but another thing I was thinking about was, this way that we've, that nature could be thought about as a kind of technology. And I was thinking about the giardini, that it's a park, it's a kind of produced form of nature. And the giardini is a kind of geopolitical map. And it's a geopolitical map of a very particular moment in history. New Zealand is not present in that geopolitical map. We are vanished from that map. So it's a very funny kind of, to me, it's a very strange place. And I was thinking about what might a pavilion, a New Zealand pavilion, look like in the giardini, and it might be a pine tree, a fake pine tree inserted into the garden, and that might be a way in, But it's a very peculiar geopolitical map with, this kind of fascist bit of architecture from Germany, and, you've got the United States and Israel kind of tucked into it, kind of shoulder to shoulder down around the corner there, and the British at the top of the hill with the French nearby. So it's a very strange affair. I can't deny that I'm not incredibly honored to get to do this. This is an amazing thing to get to do. If it means representing my country, well, that's a peculiar thing to try and do. I don't think anybody can represent a complexity that is a nation. And maybe the best way to do that is just to kind of have interesting conversations and kind of, be present and willing to produce work and have people think on it.
Thanks for listening to the show. This was Unraveled, the Adverk podcast. The show is hosted by Bernard Vienna, Philippe Henda, and Nina Kettiger, myself. It is produced by Adverk. Our theme song and jingle were produced by artist and musician Laura Katsawan. As we're starting new with the podcast, please send comments and suggestions to unraveled@art-verk.ch. Verk is written W-E-R-K. You can find all images of the works and informations discussed in this episode on our page www.art-verk.ch. If you would like to advertise or sponsor one episode, please write at contact@art-verk.ch.